one of the areas, there was several, as I understand. One of them was a municipal parking lot where the trucks were being towed to.
That's correct. That's in the south end.
Right. And that parking lot doesn't have a building you drop them off at. It doesn't have a phone. It doesn't have any of that, does it?
So I don't know what the logistics at the building were. I would imagine it would have needed to have a phone because you have to be able to call your lawyer. So
well, I can tell you it didn't. So, and these people driven out there, they were already told they weren't charged, and they weren't being charged, they were being released. But they were driven and forced outside of Ottawa or in the outer skirts and dropped off in the snow. Now, are you aware this happened, yes or no?
No, I'm not.
Total of 5 violent crimes. Steve Bell doesn't even remember what happened in Ottawa. Brendan Miller does the job of the Ottawa police in this question period. Interim Chief Steve Bell is dumbfounded by all the evidence presented to him. Please like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and most of all, comment down below. Here's the clip.
So I take it, sir, that you were aware of the February 8th, 2022 media briefing that the Ontario Police Service gave, where it was said to the media and in the public that OPS had concerns for the children of the protesters in Ottawa, and OPS wanted to discuss enforcement with the Child Aid Society of Ontario. You're aware that happened?
So you said the Ontario Police Service. I believe you mean the Ottawa Police Service.
Yes.
Do you have a document we can reference with that media release, or is that a clip?
It's a clip.
So I do recall. I don't specifically recall references to enforcement, but I do specifically recall the discussion around our concerns with children in the footprint, particularly as the situation there was becoming more volatile.
Right. But I understand, sir, from reviewing just the disclosure generally, that with respect to that media announcement, that you are in fact not supportive of it being announced to the media in that way. Do you remember that?
So no, I don't recall that.
Okay. Now, with enforcement of child protection laws, which in this province is the Child, Youth, Family Services Act, you agree that enforcement is essentially either the threat or the actual apprehension of children from parents. Is that right?
So I don't specifically recall the references to enforcement that you're speaking of. I do specifically recall us raising the issue of the potential danger that the children would be in the red zone footprint. Mm-hmm.
Now, this was, of course, done when Chief Slawley was still chief, and I, of course, will have questions for him in the same regard. But I understand it that you had nothing to do with it, but you now know that it was the firm, the political firm, Navigator, that recommended that such an announcement be made. Do you know that?
So I don't recall where the genesis of the announcement was, but I do stand behind. I had grave concerns with the fact that there were children within the footprint of an area where the activity that was occurring, but beyond that, within the area where there could be enhanced or would be enhanced enforcement activity. So regardless of where it came from, I had and shared those concerns.
Were you aware that the Child Aid Society of Ontario had no idea that announcement was being made and were quite unhappy about it?
So I was the one who was liaising with the Children's Aid Society, and that was something in gaps we identified. That was a gap that we identified. I should have had conversations with them prior to that announcement being made. But as a result of the announcement, we were able to work together to identify the proper mechanisms that we would use in the event that we did identify children who needed support within the red zone.
So you weren't aware that Navigator completed a report for February 5th that talked about some social media commentary about how the protesters could be using children as human shields, and that based on that, they recommended that this announcement be made. You're not aware of that? So
I'm not aware of any report that was actually generated by Navigator. If you could take me to it, I could.
Okay. It's anticipated that our witnesses are going to say that the day after that announcement on February 9th is when workers from Child and Family Services started to intervene with the protest. Do you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't, because I don't believe that the Children's Aid Society of Ottawa ever directly engaged or intervened in the protest. What I do understand is that we set up mechanisms in order to be able to, in the event that there was an enforcement action and children needed to be removed and then reunited with family, we set up the processes that would be put in place for that.
But that was at the enforcement stage, as I understand it. You had set up, from my review of the records, an empty gymnasium of some kind to take children to, and then the plan was to give them back to their parents. That was what you're thinking of, is that right?
So I didn't develop that specific plan, so you'll need to ask the planning team what the specific plan was.
Okay. So you're going to hear evidence eventually from some of the protesters when they eventually testify that some of the ones that were arrested, upon their release, they were essentially kidnapped by OPS officers, driven out of town in the middle of February winter by OPS officers, and left in various rural areas and parking lots outside of town with no shelter or resources. Are you aware of that?
No, because I don't know the specifics of what they're speaking about. What I do know is that we, as part of our planning, and Inspector Lucas tomorrow will be able to provide more details, but we did have remote arrest processing sites, not in rural Ottawa, in the south end of Ottawa, in a residential mixed commercial area where they were protest and then released to be able to find transportation to wherever they needed to go, which is common with the police.
Right. So one of the areas, there was several, as I understand. One of them was a municipal parking lot where the trucks were being towed to.
That's correct. That's
Right.
in the south end.
Right. And that parking lot doesn't have a building you drop them off at. It doesn't have a phone. It doesn't have any of that, does it?
So I don't know what the logistics at the building were. I would imagine it would have needed to have a phone because you have to be able to call your lawyer. So
Well, I can tell you it didn't. So, and these people driven out there, they were already told they weren't charged. And they weren't being charged, they were being released. But they were driven and forced outside of Ottawa or in the outer skirts and dropped off in the snow. Now, are you aware this happened, yes or no?
no, I'm not aware, and it wasn't outside of Ottawa. It was still within the geographical boundaries of the city of Ottawa.
In your evidence in chief, you kept using the word violence regarding protesters, right?
Yes.
All right. And you've heard the evidence of Superintendent Morris already. You sort of touched on that. And he had stated that the lack of violence in Ottawa during the protest was actually shocking.
So I don't recall that statement.
All right. So is it fair to say that when you use the phrase violence, you're not actually describing any form of physical assaults, are you?
Well, physical assaults do contribute to what I'm describing. I was specifically describing the violence that our community felt as a result of the culmination of actions that the occupiers engaged in.
So the violence that they felt, not actual violence. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. Not the criminal code definition of violence, but the violence that they felt by having incessant horns blared.
Right, and
by
not-
having trucks run 24/7 a day.
Right.
By having people intimidate them and follow them, and by having people rip masks off their head, by feeling sheltered in their homes.
Well,
where they couldn't leave.
thank you. I understand what you mean. But you're not talking about violence under Section 2 of the CSIS Act, are you?
No, I'm not.
Thanks. Now, I'd like to take you to a document right now, if I can. If we could pull up document POE.HRF 00000001. Did I get it right? Good. Is it possible to turn that so that it's the... Thank you. So, Chief, this is an email exchange of February 15th, 2022, between one of your officers, Cameron Hopgood, and Matthew Gravel of the Mayor of Ottawa's staff. You know who both those individuals are, correct?
I do.
And what is Cameron Hopgood's job as an OPS officer?
He's a manager within our data section, so he does a lot of data collection. He works on uniform crime reporting.
Okay. If we can just scroll down just a little bit. So in this email, Matthew Gravel asks for all the stats in the previous email with respect to criminal investigations, arrests, and charges. And Cameron Hopgood responds and says that there had been a total of 31 people arrested, but only 16 people charged as of February 15th, 2022. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would agree that the email states that, yes.
Right. And of course, you just said he's in the data section, so he would
That's
know
correct.
that.
That's correct.
Right? So you have no reason to disbelieve that there were only 16 charges laid as between January 28th and February 15th, 2022 regarding the protesters. Isn't that correct?
So what I would agree is that the data analysis that he would have done would have represented that. There may have been more that were in the terms of being processed, and I think this is on February 15th. There's a better table within our institutional report that more clearly identifies the numbers that would have occurred.
Right. And that is, if I can call the next document, it's the POE.HRF 00000002. And it's a copy of this, the table, but I've added some highlighting to it and some numbers. If we can zoom in on that. And this has been provided to all the parties. So what I've done is the sections there highlighted, okay?
Okay, I'm sorry, there's an objection, yes?
David Michikowski, counsel for the Ottawa Police. Perhaps I've missed it as well as the previous document, but I do not see them in the witness documents.
That's correct. I sent them out, I think, this morning.
I appreciate that, Mr. Commissioner, but the whole point of having the documents beforehand is that the witness has an opportunity to review the documents before they testify. So the documents under the rules were supposed to be posted on the
Well, I can do it with your document. It would just be easier for everybody to understand. It's up to you.
Just let him finish his objection, then we can try and
And so
resolve
the
it.
previous document, by the time I checked and realized that was also not in the witness section of the documents. So just in fairness to the witness, I appreciate sometimes things come up at the last minute, but the whole point was so that he would be familiar with it. So I don't know if my friend intends to continue asking about documents that are not in the database, but if so, I would suggest that that would not be a fair way of proceeding.
So, sorry, you were about to add something?
Yes, sir. So all this document is the exact document he just referred to, except I highlighted the stats between January 29th and February 13th, and then calculated 3 times, double-checked the total number of charges and what they were for that time period. That's all it is. I'm happy to ask him the same questions if the commission is inclined, but I think it would help everybody to essentially see. It's essentially a cross-examination tool per se.
Do you have any objection to reference to this document? It seems to me it's the police document you referred to earlier.
I do believe it is just an adaptation of the report in our institutional report. So once I be able to see it, I'll be able to assess, but I don't believe I have any challenges with it or problems with it.
Okay, on that basis, can we proceed with this at the moment?
I'm not sure what the document is, but I believe that my friend may have highlighted it and
Yes.
have some annotations on it as well. And I guess I'd be concerned about what's the annotations on it, but.
So,
They're just the numbers to that date. That's it. And it added up.
okay, if you could just make clear when we put it up, just so
Yes.
the record is clear. Okay, go ahead. So, and just so I know, so what is your annotations here?
So the only thing is I've highlighted in yellow every type of charge between January 29th and February 13th. And in red, at the end of that, I added the amount of charges that existed as of February 13th, 2022 at 11:59 PM.
So the red column is simply your addition or
Yes, sir.
lining up all the numbers?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. So what I want to do is take you through this, sir. So we've got that up, and I've explained it already. So I understand the protest begins at January 28th, 2022, and in that entire time period until February 13th, 2022 at 11:59 PM, there are a total of 4 charges laid for assault. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. And so that's a period of 17 days?
I don't believe from the 29th to the 13th is 17 days.
Well, it's 29th. They put the first charge first. You'll see that it doesn't have every single date on it. They only put the dates on it with respect to when charges were laid. There were days that went where no one was charged at all.
I think it's just simple math, 29 to 13 is not.
And it's not 17.
It's 16.
Is
That's the
it?
point you're
Okay.
making.
That's why I went to law school. I can't do math.
Thank you.
But, and you can agree with me that between January 29th to February 13th, there was a total of 4 assault charges laid then. We can agree on that.
Yes,
And with respect to assaults with a weapon, from that same time period, there was a total of 1 assault with a weapon charge laid, correct?
yes.
All right. And if we can scroll down. Oh, no, just back up, sorry, my apologies. Can you agree with me that in the entire same time period, there was no charges under the criminal code for causing a disturbance by fight or shouting or swearing?
That's yes,
And there was no charges laid against any of the protesters in that same time period for causing a disturbance by impeding or molesting a person?
that's correct.
All right. And there were also no charges laid with disturbing an occupant of a dwelling, apartment, or complex under the criminal code either, was there?
That's correct.
Okay. Can we scroll down? Perfect. And can you agree with me in that time period, that is from January 29th to February 13th at 11:59 PM, there was no charges of inciting hatred in a public place ever laid, was there?
Correct.
And you can agree with me that in that same time period, that only 1 charge of intimidation by threat of violence was ever laid.
Correct.
If we can, last one, there was no charge either in that same time period for taking a weapon of a police officer in execution of his duty.
Correct.
And in that same time period, there was never any charges of uttering threats to property to damage, or to damage property under 264.1 of the criminal code either, right?
Correct.
All right. So there's a total of 5 violent offenses charged between January 28th, 2022 and February 13th, 2022. Is that right?
So I'm not sure how you're classifying violent charges, and we'd have to go through them again to identify.
So anything dealing with an assault or threatening to cause bodily harm or to kill someone. There's 5 charges in relation to that.
I'll take your word for it. We'd have to go through the list again.
Okay. So you'd agree with me that that's not unprecedented violence, is it?
So as I defined violence, it wasn't strictly criminal code violence, and I'm happy to again go through the definition that I was using when I was talking about community violence. This is a part of it. Threats, charges under the criminal code was a part of it, but it was the trauma that the community felt. It was the extreme circumstances that they were exposed to and the duration of time that they were exposed to that has very clearly been described to me by community members as violence inflicted on them and towards them.
And so that's the honking, right? Is one of them.
Honking would be one of them.
The, I believe the exhaust coming from trucks.
But I think it's important you put it in context. It's the honking of large air horns
Right.
of approximately 300 to 400 to 500 trucks simultaneously for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not just tooting a little horn. It's the incessant noise pollution that is being inflicted on the people that we were referring to.
Right, and we've already heard evidence that as of February 7th, when Mr. Champ and his client, Zexi Lee, obtained an injunction with respect to silencing those horns, things got better. You agree?
Well, I think they got better for a period of time, yes.
Right.
But that was on the 7th. That was 9 days, 10 days into the circumstance.
Right, and it's also the fact that the trucks that were blocking up downtown Ottawa, in that area, we've heard some evidence that there's about 18,000 people. Is that right?
That would be accurate, I believe.
And what's the entirety of the population of Ottawa?
Just over 1 million.
Just over 1 million. So 18,000 residents were the ones being put through the violence as you define it.
I don't think the size of the amount of people that were being exposed to it minimizes the trauma that those community members felt and very clearly expressed. On the general population of Ottawa, it was a smaller number, but it doesn't minimize the impact it had on that number of people or that group of people.
Thank you. And this is the last document I want you to refer. I've given very short notice. It only became relevant because of some questions my friend from the federal government asked. It's pb.nSC.can.00003256_REL.0001. So if you could scroll down just to the second page, please. Thank you. So just so you know, this is, and I'm not, I know you haven't seen this before, but this is an email from Commissioner Brenda Lucki to the Chief of Staff for the Minister of Public Safety, and she has a discussion about her views on the invocation of the Emergencies Act there, and I just want to read it to you, and you can read it as well. There she states, I'm of the view that we have not yet exhausted all available tools that are already available through existing legislation. There are instances where charges could be laid under existing authority for various criminal code offenses occurring right now in the context of the protest. The Ontario Provincial Emergencies Act, just enacted, will also help in providing additional deterrent tools to our existing toolbox. Then she goes on, these existing tools are considered in our existing plan and will be used in due course as necessary. So you've had an opportunity to read that and hear it, and you also, I take it, heard the evidence from Superintendent Morris regarding there being no credible threat under Section 2 of the CSIS Act, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And you agree with me that Superintendent Morris is the most senior intelligence officer in the provincial apparatus, is that right?
It's difficult for me to scale exactly. He's a seasoned and experienced and senior intelligence officer, yes.
Okay.
You're pretty well out of time.
Yeah, I just have two last questions. Do you agree with what Commissioner Lucki said in the email I just read to you?
I believe it's a perspective for sure, and I think it's one that would be more appropriate to question her on. I've been very clear about how we utilize the provisions under the Emergency Act to actually execute our plan and create stability around the execution of our plan.
Right, do you agree with her perspective?
I do believe there could have been other opportunities. There was provisions within all of those. What I have said, and I'll say again, is we leveraged the Emergency Act as it came out to create a very stable platform to be able to access tow trucks, to be able to do the 4 or 5 different areas that I identified. So while these abilities do exist, absolutely in what Commissioner Lucky has identified, the Emergency Act created a very stable platform, a stable environment for us to execute our plan.
But last question, just because I just want to get this clear. But so you're saying that there was existing laws that you could have done the same thing under, is that right?
We had a plan. We were going to execute a plan.
Thank you.